In the icy waters west of Greenland on a fateful day in January 2026, a bright red signal suddenly flashed on the surveillance screen of the Pituffik space base. The colossal Russian nuclear icebreaker Arctica, a steel behemoth of 33,000 tons, plowed ruthlessly through the pack ice and penetrated deep into Greenland's exclusive economic zone only 18 kilometers from the capital Nuuk. A ruthless act of aggression that trampled on Denmark's sovereignty and directly challenged NATO in the Arctic tension crackled in the air, as if the Cold War had risen from its grave and the world held its breath. Imagine, dear listeners, how this monstrous machine driven by nuclear power broke through the icy barriers to turn America's backyard into a battlefield. It was not just a ship, it was a declaration of war on the high seas, a symbol of Moscow's insatiable hunger for dominance that reignited old enmities and sent the alliance of Western powers into a panic. Immediately following, the alarm sirens wailed at Thule Air Base and 2 Danish F-35 fighter jets, those ultra-modern marvels of aviation engineering, took to the skies to intercept the intruder. Each jet, a billion-dollar masterpiece of stealth technology and precision weaponry, raced at supersonic speeds through the Arctic cold. However, when they were only 50 kilometers from the target, the satellite navigation systems of both machines suddenly failed, a total blackout. Russia's devilish Murena BN electronic warfare system had been activated, creating an impenetrable jamming bubble with a radius of 100 kilometers. This invisible wall of electromagnetic chaos transformed the proud hunters into helpless blind birds in the polar sky, staggering through the clouds. It was a slap in the face to NATO, a demonstration of Moscow's technological superiority that humiliated the alliance and turned old rivalries into bloody enmity. The pilots sweated in their cockpits while the Russians laughed mockingly, an act of pure provocation that brought the world to the brink of a new war. But that was only the prelude to a nightmare that no one saw coming. The Russians had set a deadly trap that only a hidden power could reverse, a phantom in the shadows that even Moscow had underestimated. The tension rises, dear listeners, hold on, because the true battle is only now unfolding. Before we dive into the heated confrontation of 2026, let us pause for a moment and decode Moscow's sinister motives. On the geopolitical chessboard, Russia's advance was a masterfully calculated move intended to solve several strategic problems at once. In January 2026, shortly before February, when President Trump had announced he would cut NATO funding, Moscow chose this sensitive moment to turn the Greenland Sea into a second Crimea, a gray zone where international law was bent to serve military purposes, a shameless disregard for all norms that threatened the world order. At the same time, they presented their advanced Yasen-M submarine technology to their strategic partner China, as if they were forging an alliance of tyrants to crush the West. But the ultimate goal to block the US plan to upgrade the Golden Dome radar system in Pituffik. Russia wanted to prove that any American attempt to build a missile shield would turn America's own doorstep into a battlefield. Imagine the intrigue in the Kremlin corridors, generals brooding over maps, spies exchanging secrets, and Putin himself giving the order with an iron fist. It was a game with fire that ripped open old wounds and plunged NATO into a spiral of mistrust and revenge. The enmity simmered like lava under the ice, and the world wondered who would strike first. Back to the battlefield, where the tension was palpable. The failure of the F-35 squadron forced NATO into an immediate change of tactics. Fortunately for the alliance, the HMS Glasgow, a Royal Navy Type 26 frigate and the pinnacle of Western anti-submarine warfare technology, was just off the coast of Nuuk for combat exercises. Equipped with the superior Type 2087 passive sonar system, which could locate even the breath of a whale from 50 miles away, the ship turned to maximum speed upon receiving the distress call and headed straight into the disputed area to close the gap left by the Air Force. The commander, an experienced sailor with nerves of steel, ordered a warning maneuver in accordance with the rules of engagement, the dropping of an Mk-54 lightweight torpedo in non-explosive mode, which generated a massive acoustic shock to scare off the enemy. The torpedo plunged in and the waves shook a clear signal: "Get out or it will get bloody." But NATO had underestimated Russia's readiness. Hardly had the Mk-54 left the tube when the Glasgow's alarm system shrieked, "Torpedo in the water! Torpedo in the water, bearing 300 degrees!" It did not come from the surface. Not from the Arctica. No, it rose from a depth of 150 meters of phantom from the deep. The Yasen-M class submarine Kazan, the most modern monster of the Northern Fleet, had been lurking there who knows for how long. The Russian captain did not wait for orders from Moscow. He acted on the principle of an eye for an eye. A heavy 53 to 65K torpedo was fired not with an active explosive charge, but programmed to detonate nearby via a proximity fuse. Seconds later, an explosion tore through the ocean. A 30-meter-high water column shot up only 400 meters in front of the HMS Glasgow. The pressure of the underwater explosion from this 2-ton Russian behemoth was 10 times stronger than that of the British torpedo, and a gigantic wall of water crashed against the ship's bow. The entire composite sonar dome at the front of the HMS Glasgow was crushed like a can under a hammer. Britain's most modern ship was instantly blind underwater, drifting helplessly on the sea, a wreck of humiliation. The crew felt the shock in their bones, alarms blared, and the enmity escalated. Russia had not only provoked but struck, as if they intentionally wanted to push NATO into the abyss. Now, the HMS Glasgow, the pride of the British Navy, was a helpless target drifting on the sea while the invisible enemy lurked. The situation worsened from bad to catastrophic for the coalition forces. Hardly was the Glasgow disabled when 3 new targets appeared from the north on the maritime radar screens: 3 Okin-class Project 22,100 border guard ships of the Russian Federal Security Service. These 90-meter-long colossi moved in a horizontal formation, looming menacingly and blocking the British frigate's path to the port of Nuuk. Legally, this was a masterstroke by Moscow. These ships were registered as law enforcement vessels, not military units. According to the collision regulations rule, 18 NATO warships were not allowed to take aggressive action or collide with these law enforcers. It was a perfidious tactic that lured NATO into a trap blocked above Invincible below. For the true threat continued to lurk beneath the ocean, the Russian Kazan nuclear attack submarine glided silently at a depth of 150 meters. In the Arctic, this depth is tactically decisive. It lies directly below the thermocline, where differences in temperature and salinity create a natural acoustic barrier. Sonar waves from NATO sonobuoys refract and bounce back to the surface instead of reaching the seabed. To NATO's remaining sensors, the Kazan was completely invisible. British ships blocked at the surface, Russian submarines invisible in the depths, and the sky sealed by electronic interference. The situation seemed settled with victory on Moscow's side. Imagine, dear listeners, if you were the NATO admiral in this moment of despair. Would you A, order a full-scale attack risking World War III to save the British ship, or B, retreat humbly and accept that Russia is making this sea its backyard? Share your opinion in the comments, A or B. And now let's see how the Americans solve this tricky puzzle. Washington watched the entire drama from afar and decided it was time to intervene. Russia's actions were no longer a gray dispute, but a direct military attack on the equipment of the Allied bloc, an escalation that enraged the West and put old alliances to the test. At the nearby Putufik space base, American technicians quietly activated the new OTH radar system, a next-generation wonder weapon. Unlike conventional radars, which are limited by the horizon or vulnerable to local interference, the REL-6 uses the ionosphere to scan the ocean surface up to 3,000 kilometers away. Even more impressive, it was upgraded with an AI signal processing algorithm that excellently filters noise and detects the smallest disturbances like the swirl of a snorkel or pressure changes caused by a 13,000-ton submarine. The data from Petafik was transmitted via a secure, very low-frequency connection, the only one that could penetrate Russia's electronic jamming bubble. Despite the thermocline, despite the acoustic stealth, the Kazan appeared on American radar screens as a long scar on the ocean surface at coordinates 72 degrees 16 minutes, north 55 degrees 32 minutes west, estimated depth 220 meters. It was a triumph of technology that broke Moscow's arrogance and raised the enmity to a new level. The US had unmasked the invisible enemy as if they could look into the soul of Russia. The target position data was immediately forwarded to a US Navy P-8A Poseidon, which took off from Thule and used an inertial navigation system to bypass the jammed GPS. The hunt was now truly underway, a cat-and-mouse game that captivated the world. Upon receiving the coordinates, the P-8A did not attack immediately. They knew that the Kazan was a fearsome opponent and they sought a decisive psychological victory. Instead of scattering sonar, the Poseidon dropped 88 AFD-SV type active sonobuoys in a checkerboard pattern, creating a 20 by 20 kilometer ASW death zone that completely surrounded the Kazan. These buoys simultaneously emitted multi-static sonar pulses that attacked from all directions, penetrated water layers, and nullified the Kazan's stealth. The crew of the P-8A cheered inwardly as the computer system confirmed target acquisition, a moment of revenge that shattered Russian overconfidence. Then the weapons bay opened, a heavy Mk-48 ADC-AP torpedo dropped down. The key to the tactic, the torpedo was wire-guided, immune to all acoustic jamming measures. A weapons officer in the aircraft steered it directly as it dived at 55 knots to a depth of 220 meters. But instead of destroying the Kazan, the Mark 48 approached the Russian vessel and veered off at the last moment, grazing the conning tower at a distance of less than 50 meters. The howl of the torpedo's pump jet propulsion echoed through the Russian submarine like the call of death, a non-verbal message of ultimate dominance. "We know where you are and we can destroy you at any time." It was a blow to the core of the Russian soul, turning enmity into pure hatred. But the captain of the Kazan was no novice. In the command room, he gritted his teeth and ordered the emergency evasion procedure. Immediately, the Kazan fired a volley of 12 MG-74 Korand hydroacoustic decoys. These devices were not simple noisemakers. They were intelligent robots that exactly simulated the engine noises, propeller frequencies, and even the physical echoes of a Yasen-class nuclear submarine. Suddenly, the P-8A's combat screen swarmed with 13 red dots racing chaotically in 13 directions. Simultaneously, the Kazan turned sharply, shut down all machinery, and drifted freely into a marine trench to hide in natural seismic noises. Russia challenged the US system to distinguish between real and fake, a clever counteroffensive that plunged the Americans into confusion and increased the tension to an unbearable level. In the aircraft, the AI temporarily overloaded and the crew sweated one miss and the Kazan would escape, reversing the situation. But the American admiral in the Pentagon had anticipated this stubbornness. They switched to an unalterable law of physics: magnetic fields. The P-8A Poseidon descended to sea level only 60 meters above the waves, an extremely risky maneuver in the blizzard. The pilot activated the MAD sensor at the tail. No matter how sophisticated the Russian MG-74 decoys were, they remained small blocks of metal. The Kazan, however, was a 13,000-ton steel colossus, a gigantic magnet that distorted the Earth's magnetic field everywhere. Detecting a massive magnetic anomaly at bearing 300, the weapons officer shouted. The Kazan's hiding place was revealed a moment of triumph that shattered Moscow's illusion of invincibility. This time, the USA did not use a torpedo. They dropped a small device called a SUS charge directly over the Kazan. This emitted an extremely powerful acoustic shockwave comparable to a grenade explosion next to the hull. Inside the Kazan, the explosion echoed like a death knell, shaking the entire ship and momentarily deafening the Russian sonar. The Russian captain was stunned. Electronic systems wobbled. The submarine lost its orientation in the deep sea full of hidden mountains. Further hiding would end in a rock crash explosion guaranteed. The game was over. The pride of the Northern Fleet was broken by superior Western technology. With no choice to save the lives of the crew, the captain ordered an emergency ascent. High-pressure air rushed into the ballast tanks. At 10:45 a.m. on January 14, 2026, the frozen sea surface shattered. The black beast Yasen-M, the pride of the Northern Fleet, surfaced right in Denmark's EEZ, exposed to the daylight. For a nuclear submarine forced to emerge in enemy waters, this was the greatest humiliation, irrefutable proof of Russia's violation of territorial waters. Seeing their commander captured, the icebreaker Arctica and the 3 FSB ships quietly turned around and retreated toward Russia, an ignominious flight that shocked the world. In Brussels, NATO officials breathed a sigh of relief. The confrontation ended, but Russia had gathered valuable data on NATO's reaction frequencies. The British Type 26 had to be towed into port at a cost of millions, and Europe realized the fragility of its security umbrella without US technology. On the US side, despite the tactical victory, the Pentagon knew that secrets of the OTH radar in Pitufik and the Death Box submarine tactics were partially revealed. The cat-and-mouse game in the Arctic has begun a new, more brutal chapter, more complex, more dangerous, with potential global consequences. In your opinion, dear listeners, was the decision to reveal the OTH radar card to save America's allies a stroke of genius or a strategic error? Share your analysis in the comments below.